If Russia succeeds in the Ukrainian war, it is certain to launch an offensive against NATO member states. This was the message delivered by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky via video link in Brussels on Thursday. And there at headquarters, everywhere are signs saying we are NATO. But Ukraine is not.
I'm sure you already understand that Russia is not thinking of stopping at Ukraine, willing to go further.
Zelensky was heard in the hall by the US President Joe Biden, French President Emmanuel Macron, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. All of them arrived in Brussels on March 24, exactly 1 month after Russia started its war against Ukraine. As they say, an emergency summit.
We are determined to do all we can to support Ukraine. But we have a responsibility to ensure that the war does not escalate beyond Ukraine and become a conflict between NATO and Russia.
Right now, Volodymyr Zelensky has put everything into place. This is what his speech to the representatives of NATO countries in Brussels looked like. He says that it is clear that Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and NATO has no obligations to protect our country, but the alliance itself needs the protection of Ukraine anyway. And decisions of individual NATO member states looks weaker than collective decision on behalf of the entire alliance. It is worth to mention that Volodymyr Zelensky softened the rhetoric towards the alliance compared to his previous speeches and concentrated on explaining to the allies that their attitude towards Russia is mistaken.
I don't blame NATO. You shouldn't. It's not your missiles and bombs that are destroying our cities. There were phosphorus bombs today that killed Ukrainian children. I just want you to know that the alliance can still prevent Ukrainians from dying from Russian strikes by providing us with all the weapons we need. Yes, we are not in the alliance, but I'm not making any claims. But Ukrainians have never thought that the alliance and the alliance states are apart, that in matters of life and death alone you can be a force, but together you cannot, that NATO may also be afraid of Russia's actions.
The Prime Minister of Slovenia, Janez Janša, clearly described ways to support Ukraine. Those on NATO's eastern flank understand the real situation in our Eastern European region better than anyone else.
I think that there are 4 things Ukraine needs the most. One is hope, and that they are not abandoned. Second thing is our modern weapons. Third thing is money, to survive in this situation where economy is disturbed. And fourth thing is humanitarian aid.
Washington as well is assessing the situation. US and NATO intelligence agencies have not detected any activity by the Russian military that would suggest preparations to use nuclear weapons. The New York Times reported, citing a senior US administration official.
Vladimir Putin has already crossed the red line into barbarism, and I think it's now up to NATO to consider together the appalling crisis in Ukraine, the appalling suffering of the people of Ukraine, and to see what more we can do to help the people of Ukraine to protect themselves, see what more we can do to tighten the economic vice around the Putin regime. And that's
NATO is a collective body. All decisions here are taken by consensus of 30 member states. And if the Polish Prime Minister offers to start a dialogue on the creation of NATO peacekeeping mission for Ukraine, it does not mean that this idea can ever be realized. And Stoltenberg himself has repeatedly given a negative answer to this request. Apparently, the distance between Brussels and Warsaw, and especially Kiev, gives it away. The closer to the front lines, the more realistic the proposal for deterring Russia look. But the further away from Mariupol and Chernihiv, the less can be heard the cries of pain and tears of Ukrainian women and children who suffers from Russian shelling. Oleksiy Matsuka from Brussels for UATV.